Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. We got another video for you today. We're going to be talking about the sump. I'm going to answer the question, what's in my sump? The tank's been running for about 7 months now, and I've gone through some changes with the sump. I'm going to talk about what equipment I'm running in the sump now, what seems to be working. And after I talk about what's in my sump, I'm going to touch on what I like about the sump of the Red Sea Reefer G2 350 and what I don't like. Stay tuned. Let's get into it. So let's just jump right in. So I'm going to go through each piece of equipment I have currently in the sump. So first up is this little ring camera, and why I have it kind of zip tied here to the drain is I like to be able to see if my skimmer is overflowing at any moment in time. If I'm at work, if I'm on a trip, whatever it may be, I like to be able to keep the doors shut. First of all, I have young kids. I want to keep the doors shut to the cabinet, but I like to be able to see inside, and so that's what the ring camera is for, is to make sure the skimmer's not overflowing, make sure I can look at my filter socks to see if they're overflowing, see if there's any splashing or leaking water. It just gives me another set of eyes. So that's the first piece of equipment I have here in the sump. Okay, now let's look at the drain section of the sump. So I have an emergency drain and a normal drain that goes in this little compartment. And in this area I have all my probes. So I have an Inkbird controller that hooks up to a couple heaters, and those temperature probes are in this holder. And I also have the Apex temperature probe there, so I have some redundancy on the heater side of things. I've had a few problems with heaters and tanks in the past, so I like the redundancy. And in addition to that, I have my pH probe there. Now, to the right of those probes, I have my two-part tubing. So this is where my calcium and my alkalinity gets dosed into the tank. It's a high flow area. I didn't want it in the return section of the sump because I don't want. I've done that before, and you can lock up your return pump if you're not careful and you overdose or something. So I wanted a high flow area away from equipment, and the drain area just made the most sense. So that's where I'm dosing my two-part. Now for my two-part, I'm just using an Apex dose, and I'm actually dosing ESV Bionic. So it's a little spendy, but it's convenient. It mixes up just a little bit of, I add a little bit of RODI water and mix it up, and it's quick, so it's convenient. And there's also some trace elements in it, so I guess I'm paying for that too. But it works well, and I've used it for many years, and so I'm going to stick with what works, right? Now next to the drain and the probes, and where I'm dosing two-part, I have the stock socks that I am using. So at one point I stopped using the socks. I have to change them out every 3 days, but I noticed when I stopped using them, the detritus was really building up in the sump, and I was vacuuming it out every water change, but it just got a little annoying. And so I thought, let's slow it down, let me deal with the socks, and ideally, get a reef mat or something in the future as the tank matures. But right now I'm dealing with the socks, and so I just use the mesh socks. They don't capture everything, but they allow me to go about 3 days in between cleanings. And the mesh also allows me to clean them out by hand, so I don't have to throw them in the dish, in the washer, or take them out and spray them out with the hose. So I can get them pretty clean, just rinsing them out, putting them inside out, and rinsing them out in the sink. Now from the socks, the water filters down through the socks, flows through the socks, I should say, into my Refugium area. And here I'm growing Chaetomorpha. Originally I had a Kessel H160 Refugium light. It was, the purple pinkish. I couldn't stand it. I just couldn't stand that color of light. I couldn't even look at the sump. And I actually find a lot of entertainment in watching the Refugium, watching the critters that are there, watching pods move around, and it just is much easier on my eyes just to look at traditional 10K lighting, and it grows the Chaeto just fine, as you can see. So I'm running two Tunzi strip lights. They are waterproof, you can submerge them, but just for now I'm just keeping them above the Chaeto. And I like that they're low profile, and I like that I can get them pretty low to the Chaeto. unlike the Kessel, there was a lot of light spill, but now the light's really concentrated down, and I don't get as much algae and other stuff going on in the skimmer or in the return section or through my socks, etc. Now underneath my Kato, I have some live rock rubble from Tampa Bay, and I did this to really seed the biome, because I started with all dry Marco rock in the display, and I really do think this helped speed things up, and I like the diversity in bacteria I'm hoping is being added to the tank. And because the rubble's just been down in the sump and not in the display, some of the bad critters that have come on it aren't up there, so it's okay. You know, there's going to be some microscopic critters that may make it up there, but for the most part, this rock's been really great. You can see I have some sponges on this rubble throughout, feather dusters, all kinds of worms, so all kinds of good critters. Now I did get a couple of bad hitchhikers, a couple of gorilla crabs showed up, but without a lot of effort, I was able to capture them. What happened is, as I fed frozen food, that food went into the filter socks, and then they tried to get the food out of the filter socks and were stuck in the filter socks, and I just popped them right out. So, and then some people keep gorilla crabs in their sump and whatever, but I took them out. I had them removed. So far, I'm pretty pleased with this live rock rubble. It's a little bit of a detritus trap, but I'm okay with that. I move it around and vacuum it out periodically. Now next to my Kato, I have a couple of titanium heaters, and the Kato grows around it, and it hasn't been fried by the heaters or anything. There's been no issue. So if you ever need a space to put your heaters, try the Fuge section. And if you're growing Kato, I haven't had any issue with it. So I do run a couple of titanium heaters there for redundancy. Now above the Refugium section, I have a CO2 scrubber, and I struggled with pH early on in this tank, and I've been working on pH this last few weeks. I think it was partly to blame for a couple of the SPS frags I picked up that they RTN'd. My pH was quite low, and I'm actually probably do a video on my pH and how I was able to get that to increase and stabilize. But this CO2 scrubber is hanging above the Refugium section. I like it inside the cabinet because I think the humidity and the moisture helps the CO2 media last a little longer, so that's why I have it in there rather than somewhere else. But in short, stay tuned. I'll have a video on pH, but it's working well. It is directly hooked to my Reef Octopus skimmer, which has been a great skimmer, a set and forget skimmer. Never overflows. I can do some fine adjustment, fine tuning with it, and I'm pretty happy with the amount of skimmate that I'm getting out of it. So it's working really, really well. Now next to the skimmer, I have a small C-shape pump, and that's feeding my UV sterilizer, and that's been working really well. It's not optimized right. Ideally, you'd want the flow going through this through the display. So I may be recirculating some water in the sump, but that's okay. It's kept my fish. I had some ick issues at first, and no fish deaths, no mortality. It's kept things okay. So that's the UV sterilizer. Now next to the skimmer is this little section where you can put a sponge, and they give you this sponge when you buy this tank, and I do use it because it helps reduce the micro bubbles and keeps the water just looking a little bit more pristine. And what I did was I cut the sponge in half, and so every water change I'll pull the half out and then put the new half in, and then I'll rinse that other half and let it air dry, so the next time I do water change it's ready. And so I just swap the halves out. I didn't find you needed the full sponge. If you just cut it in half or maybe even a third, it will do the trick and trap those air bubbles, and also keep a little bit of the Kato and stuff from going down to the return section. Now in my return section, I've got a new return pump. I got the Neptune Apex Core 15, I believe that's what it's called. So it's adjustable. I picked it up because many people said to try this type of pump to see if I can stabilize the water level in my overflow. It turns out it didn't solve that issue. I'm still playing with this downflow valve all the time, but this has a max head pressure of or max pressure of 1,500 gallons per hour, I believe. I run it at 60%, and that's been pretty adequate for me. I don't like a ton of flow going through the sump, but I've been pretty happy with it. It's dead quiet, super quiet, and it's been super reliable for me. And so I'll keep my other pump, it was just a basic C-shape pump, on hand as a backup, because this is the heart of your system, right? Your return pump. It's always got to be working. Now next to my return pump, I have a Tunzi auto top-up system. It's the 3155. It's the basic one everyone seems to be using. I've used it on several systems. It's reliable. It works great, and I put it right in that section, the return section, next to the return pump, and that seems to do the trick. So that's the sump in a nutshell, and the equipment I'm using. The only other things I've made is a couple of strip lights I've added to the top here that are magnetic and that stick to the top. And that's what's keeping the system healthy and alive and thriving at the moment. And I'm pretty happy with everything so far. Clearly I've made a few choices that are different now than when I started, including that Refugium light. And I'm back to socks. So other than that, things are working really well. Now let's get into some review of this sump. And what I like about it, and particularly what I don't like about it. Now when it comes to filter socks, I don't know what's going on, maybe it's just mine, but I have a hard time getting the socks snugly fit in there. The rings just don't seem to fit without a lot of really pushing and kind of massaging those rings into place. So that's been one thing that's pretty disappointing. The other thing about this sump that I've kind of struggled with is I think the return section's a little small. The pump I have, the Core 15, it's plenty, I suppose, but it doesn't leave any room. Like if I wanted to throw the heaters there, or if I wanted to get a little bigger pump, or run another two pumps out of that area, it's a little tight. So that's one negative I didn't like about this sump, is the return section's a little small. A couple things I like is I think the Refugium space is quite nicely sized. It's quite adequate in size, and the space for your skimmer. There's plenty of room. You could fit a fairly large, oversized skimmer if you wanted to do that. As you can see, I'm running a skimmer and a pump in there for the UV, and there's plenty of room. So I do like the adequate space for the Fuge in the skimmer section. Next to the skimmer is an adjustable baffle that I can lower or raise the water height and get it nicely set for the type of skimmer that you're going to run. So I think that's a really nice feature. Just a couple of nylon or plastic nuts, I suppose, that you loosen. You can pull that thing up and down and change the water level really quickly. So that's been a nice feature. One thing I don't like is, and I think I've mentioned this before, but the sides of the sump, it's tight. There's not a lot of room. So if you have any clip-on stuff, I have enough room to fit magnets behind it here for my Tunzi light strips. This side, not so much. It's even tighter. But the sump takes up pretty much all the room that you have in the cabinet, and you might want to think about how you want to position it if you want to clamp on anything on the sides or the rim of the tank. That's one thing that's been a little frustrating to work around. And the last thing about the sump, or I guess I don't know if this is considered the sump area, but the return plumbing, I don't have it hard plumbed yet. I'm going to do that. I probably will do a manifold so I can run some stuff off my return pump, maybe even a frag tank. Stay tuned for that. But I don't like the return, how it tees and goes into two 90-degree elbows. I think that really inhibits head pressure and can make things a little more difficult. And it may be why I'm experiencing inconsistent water rising and lowering in my overflow. It's just, I don't know. I have some theories about that, but I won't get into it. I've beat that horse enough. So I think that about sums it up, guys. I think overall the build quality of the sump is actually pretty good. It's pretty heavy duty. I have a lot of faith in it, and I know there's horror stories out there with Red Sea tanks, but I'm pleased with the sump. I feel like it's sound and it's done pretty well. Considering how much space you have under this tank, I'm really pleased with it. I couldn't really ask for more except for those few things I mentioned. So with the addition of the new return pump, the Core 15, you can see over here on my control panel, I'm pretty much 100% Neptune Apex now. So we'll see how this goes. But for the most part, I'm 100% Neptune except for just a couple of controllers here for the Ecotech pumps. So that's it, guys. That's the overview of the sump, what equipment I'm running, and how things are going. I thought I would focus on the sump this video because right now on the display we just have a ton of tiny little sticks. So we're going to give those little sticks time to grow and see if I can get through this first year and keep them all alive. If we hit that year mark, I think things will really start taking off. Thanks again for tuning in. Appreciate you coming along with me on this journey. Please hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't. And we'll see you all in the next update. Peace.